On today's episode of Behind the Wire, Washington State is doubling down on trying to hide our voting records from the federal government. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Behind the Wire on Rebel Radio. I'm your host, Robert Burwell. I'm also the president of Washington 3%. And as I stated in the opening, Washington State is now doubling down on trying to hide our voter records from the federal government. Wonder why they're doing that. Pretty obvious, isn't it? But we'll talk about that later. Okay, so this was just pre-filed on December 16th of this year. It is Senate Bill 5892, and is being proposed for the 2026 regular session by Senators Richelli and Valdez by request of the Secretary of State. So Secretary of State is requesting that they submit this bill to the rest of the Senate and to be approved to try to fortify their position of hiding our voting rolls from the federal government. As you all know, earlier this month, the federal government requested to see our voter rolls from Washington State, and of course the state is fighting it, and so that's going to all go to court later. But one has to think, why would the state want to hide the voter rolls? I mean, if our elections in Washington State have integrity, and there's no foul play going on, why not let the government have it? But Washington's doubling down on not allowing the federal government to see our voter rolls. So anyway, this bill is basically they're going to edit some of our RCWs to try to make it stronger for them to withhold it from the federal government. And so this bill is an act relating to protecting the voter registration database, amending RCW 42.56.425 and 29 alpha.84.150, prescribing penalties and declaring an emergency. So they're declaring an emergency. Evidently, it's an emergency that the federal government wants to make sure that Washington's not cheating, and it's an emergency to try to hide the fact that they are, evidently. Anyways, what the original RCW covers is just election security and exempt from disclosure stuff that already exists. And, it talks a lot, and I'm not going to go into the whole thing because it'd be a really long video if I read the whole thing, but they only made a couple of really minor changes, and those are really important changes. And just try to give you an overview of what the RCW is actually covering. It says it's related to election security, exempt from disclosure under this chapter. It talks about all the stuff that's exempt from being disclosed. Portions of records, documentation, technical details regarding election infrastructure. You have records regarding infrastructure of a private entity. So basically, records regarding the places where polling happens, things like that. Voted ballot images, copy of voted ballots, photographs of voted ballots, facsimiles, images of voted ballots, or return from the voter during storage per RCW 29 alpha.60.110 and through destruction following any retention period or litigation. So, it says they can't disclose any ballots from the time they get them till the time they destroy them. And this is already existing. They did this a few years ago when they decided to start hiding stuff from the public and not allow us to see the voter rolls here as citizens of the state. But bottom line, it just says, well, all the stuff that we as citizens of the state can't look at. And, now since they're trying to stop the government from looking at it, they're adding a little bit more stronger language in here. Now, let's see. Paragraph 4 under section E of this RCW is where they made the change on this RCW. And the change is, it's talking about requests for records from any let me say again, requests for records from or any existing reports generated by the statewide voter registration database established under RCW 29 alpha.08.105 must be submitted to and fulfilled by the Secretary of State. So say any requests have to go through Secretary of State. That's unchanged. If a county election office receives a request for records from or any existing reports generated by the statewide voter registration database established under RCW 29 alpha.08.105, I'm going to read you the original wording first, and I'm going to read what they changed. The county elections official is required to produce any records in response to the request, but shall by the deadline set forth in RCW 42.56.520 direct the requested to submit the request to the Secretary of State. So, it's saying if somebody requests a county official to see the voter records, right, the reports generated from voter records, that they are required to produce those records in response to the request. And then they have to tell the requester to submit their request to the Secretary of State. But they have to produce them. They have to, according to the way it was written before. But how they've changed this is it says, let's see, let me back up. If a county elections office receives a request for records from or any existing reports granted by the statewide voter registration database established under our RCW 29 alpha.08.105, the county elections office shall not produce any records in response to the request. So they changed it from the county election office is required to produce records to the county elections office shall not produce any records. So they changed it from you're required to give these records up under freedom of information, but they changed it to you shall not do it. And then they add another line to the end. This is really important to the people working there. And this is the line they added. A knowing violation of this subsection is a violation of RCW 29 alpha.84.150. Okay, so they're saying that that's a violation under this RCW if they provide the requested data under voter freedom of information. Now, if you go down to section 2 of RCW 29 alpha.84.150 and 2004 C267 section 138 are each amended to read as follows. Okay. Excuse me. So, under section 1, any state or local, I'm going to read you the original on this, and then I'll read what they changed. They just changed one word. But any state or local election officer or a designee who has access to any county or statewide voter registration database who knowingly uses or alters information in the database inconsistent with the performance of his or her duties is guilty of a Class C felony punishable under RCW 9 alpha.20.021. So basically this is saying anybody who works at a polling booth, if they use or alter information from the database. In other words, if they go, that's a Class C felony. And basically what they're talking about is, use or alters. If somebody goes in there and change how somebody voted, that's a felony. If somebody uses that information, to gain their personal information, to scam the people in some way, using the personally identifiable information to get in their bank accounts or whatever they might use that information for, that's a felony. That's what this subsection originally was about, was, punishing people for misusing our data, right? Or changing our vote and defrauding the election system. But they've added one more word into this section of what is a felony. And so instead of it just saying any state or local election officer or designee who has access to any county or statewide voter registration database who knowingly uses, instead of it just saying what it said before, it says who knowingly uses, they added discloses or alters information in the database inconsistent with performance of his or her duties is guilty of a Class C felony punishable under RCW 9 alpha 0.20.021. So now they've added that it's a felony to disclose any of the information that they see on the voter rolls. It's a Class C felony. So basically what they're doing here is, say you got a poll worker who's working the polls and he sees in the printout that there's some shady stuff going on, like duplications of people voting if they vote more than once. If they know there's people who on there who are illegals or whatever. Normally this is whistleblower territory, right? If somebody sees that, they would say, hey, go to the press, whistleblower, there's some shady stuff going on here. Well, now it's a Class C felony to be a whistleblower in Washington State if you see anything blatantly wrong in the elections. If you're working at a polling station or whatever, if you're dealing with our voter data and you notice inconsistencies that are illegal, you are now charged with a felony if you try to report that. But they also added a whole nother paragraph to this section too. So this is a new paragraph they added to even bolster it even stronger. The Washington driver's license number, Washington identification card number, social security number, and full birth date shown on an affidavit of voter registration or included in a voter registration file are confidential and shall not be disclosed to any person except to the state or local election officers and election officials unless authorized by the office of the Secretary of State. Any state officer or election official or designee who knowingly violates this subsection is guilty of a Class C felony punishable under RCW 9 alpha 0.20.021. So they're saying because of voter registrations, they have, give license numbers and all that kind of thing, right? They're saying that if you disclose any of that, right, say you find somebody who's got a bogus driver's license, you can see on their registration stuff that it's obviously fictitious or whatever. If you disclose that, that's a Class C felony. Now, here's the rub. When you're talking about disclosing things like people's personally identifiable information, driver's license, social security numbers, stuff like that, that's all big no-no, right? And we know that it's, and that's already covered in many other laws that you can't share people's personally identifiable information. That's a crime and you'll go to jail for that. It's already a crime. The reason they're putting it in here is, again, because they want to protect their fraudulent voter rolls. They don't want these people people who see this stuff and would be whistleblowers to share it with the federal government, because that's going to give away their scam they've been running forever in this state. And so now they're going to make it a felony if you try to be a whistleblower and tell the federal government the truth. So basically, they're trying to hide the fact that their voter rolls are BS. And I'm going to go into that a little bit more here in a sec. But they also added one new section. The last section they added is Section 3. This act is necessary for the immediate preservation of the public peace, health, or safety, or support of the state government and its existing public institution, and takes effect immediately. So there's only one thing that's true in that whole line. Okay, they're saying that this is necessary to protect public peace. If the government audits our voting rolls to make sure that we're actually having legal elections, that doesn't affect my peace whatsoever. What affects my peace is the fact that they're trying to hide it. Also, it says our health. How is the government looking at our voter rolls going to affect my health? Am I going to magically get cancer? I guess it might affect the health of the left because they'll have a mental breakdown if they get caught cheating. But other than that, that's about the only health issues that could be at risk. So that's, again, these changes are not needed for public peace, health, or safety. Really, what are they going to do? Go into the polling station? The ICE is going to go in there and start shooting them up. So we got to protect their safety. I mean, what safety is at risk by them trying to expose the fraud in our state elections? What safety is at risk? There is none. They just put these words in there: public peace, health, and safety, to make it look like they're doing this for us, the voters. And they're not doing it for us. They're doing it to cover their own ass. And they do that with the very next part of this sentence where they say, or support of the state government. That's why this is in there. That's why they're making these changes, for the support of the state government, to hide the fact that they've been cheating for years on elections, magically finding ballots and all this other stuff. But they've been illegally registering aliens to vote for years, 15, 20 years at least. Ever since they passed the law where they could give them driver's license, they've been registering illegals to vote. You don't have to register to vote in Washington State. When you get a driver's license or ID, you are automatically registered. Since they let illegals get IDs and driver's licenses in Washington State, they're automatically registered to vote. Non-citizens cannot vote in federal elections. That's why the federal government has an interest in looking at our voter rolls, because since we issue driver's licenses to illegal immigrants in this state, and because you're automatically registered to vote when you get said driver's license and ID card, that means these people are on the voter rolls and they will be getting ballots and they will be voting. Now, again, it's against federal law for a non-citizen to vote in federal elections. And that's what they're trying to hide here. And like I said, this has absolutely nothing to do with our public peace, health, or safety, and everything to do with supporting the state government to try to cover their rear ends because they're breaking federal law, and they have been for years. Now, going back to the, it's a felony, under Class C felony to disclose any, voter rolls or paperwork to, say, the federal government. Any of our paperwork that has our personally identifiable information on it, it's a felony. Now, naturally, that's a felony. No, not necessarily a felony, but it's against the law to share people's personally identifiable information because that's how people hack your bank account, steal all your money, whatever. But what they're trying to protect it from is the federal government. They want to make it a felony to, if a county worker finds a bunch of bogus things on the rolls that have their, their name and their address and all this other garbage on it, and they share that with the federal government, they want to make that a felony because they're trying to protect us, right? Trying to protect our personal information from the federal government. Newsflash. The federal government has all that information every single year when you vote. I mean, not when you vote, when you do your taxes. Every single year when you do your taxes, they get your name, your social security number, your address, all your personally identifiable information the government already has, and they get it updated every single year. So the fact that they're supposedly protecting the privacy of the voters from the evil federal government, protecting our personally identifiable information from the evil federal government, is the biggest crock of shit lie in the galaxy. I mean, really, the government already has that. You give it to them voluntarily every year when you do your taxes. They have all that stuff. They're not protecting our personally identifiable information like they're trying to claim. What they're protecting is the fact that they have people on our voter rolls who can't legally vote in federal elections. And that our elections have been a scam for years, decades, and this is all just a big CYA, cover your ass move by the Democrats in Washington state to try to bolster their ability to keep the federal government from looking at our voter rolls. We'll have to see how it plays out in court, but I'm pretty sure the federal government's going to win on this one, because if it involves federal elections, the federal government rules take precedence over state. Okay, you cannot state laws cannot go against federal laws. They can add to federal laws, but they cannot go against federal laws. And federal law says illegals cannot vote in statewide elections. And because of the way our registration system works, there's a very high likelihood that the illegals are voting. And we're pretty sure they are, considering there's a lot more votes than we should have being tallied in the state. But anyways, that's all I have on that subject. But yeah, just Washington once again trying to cover their own ass, trying to lie to you and tell you that it's for your own good and all this other stuff. And it's not. It's all to protect themselves. It's for the Democratic Party to protect themselves from the federal government and try to keep their own butts out of jail. That's all it is. That's all I have on that subject. Prepping tip of the day. So today I'm just going to talk real short a little bit about food preservation. Okay, we all knew canned foods stick around for a long time, but we're talking about preserving food. There's a lot of different ways to preserve certain types of food. Really good food to stockpile and try to save is pasta, right? You can buy pasta for nothing. Pasta is easy to make. You just throw in boiling water, it boils up, throw some sauce on it or whatever, you got something to eat, right? You want to keep pasta fresh for a long time. You put it in, what's this? You put it in a plastic bag that's made for this, and you put it in there. You throw a oxygen absorber in it, and you can vacuum seal that up. That pasta will stay forever. As far as preserving food, there's lots of stuff you can do to preserve, other types of food like fruits, vegetables. And, you could even make meals and preserve them. There's different ways to do it. Canning, if you know how to can. There's lots of videos on how to do that. You seal it up in a jar. It's good for years. That's one way. Another way is you can get dehydrators pretty cheap. You can dehydrate anything, especially, you can, we've dehydrated whole meals like chili and spaghetti stuff. You just dehydrate it because that's, it's really easy. You dehydrate, and again, you put it in the plastic bag, and I forget what that type of plastic's called. It's just gone out of my mind right now, but you can look it up, find all this out. You put it in there, you can vacuum, with some oxygen absorbers, vacuum seal that bad boy, throw it on the shelf. It takes up less space than real food, than whole food. And you pull it out, you put some hot water in it, let it sit for a few minutes, and it reconstitutes. Really good to eat. It's a good way to store stuff without taking up a lot of space. And if you have the money, I highly recommend getting a freeze dryer. Those are really nice. They work really well. Freeze dry stuff. Again, you can store it vacuum sealed or whatever, and it'll store for a long time. It takes up no space. It doesn't weigh anything because all the water's been removed. It's a good way to store a lot of food in tight places by dehydrating, freeze drying, things like that. It's a really good way. I mean, canning, you can store a lot of food, but that takes up a lot of room and it's heavy. Dehydrating it and vacuum packing it, or freeze drying it and vacuum packing it, it takes up a lot less space, doesn't weigh nothing, and it lasts a long time. If you ever go out and buy those like little hiker meals and stuff, those are all freeze dried or dehydrated depending on what you're getting. And you can make that own stuff, that stuff yourself for your own use, and it's really easy, doesn't take much time. And like I said, dehydrators are pretty cheap. Freeze dryers are a little more expensive, but they're awesome. But anyway, so those are just some basic ways. Like I said, I'm not going to go into all the details, all the stuff. I'm just giving you some ideas, which you can go online and find thousands of videos about these things to see what method of food preservation might be right for you. Bottom line is, though, if it's if we ever get hit with something that's gonna be major and we're down for a long time, where the food distribution is disrupted for indefinitely, if you don't have some preserved food, the stuff you do have will not last that long before it starts going bad. So it's good to be able to preserve your own food and to have it stockpiled. And like I said, you can stockpile a whole lot more if it's dehydrated or freeze dried. Yeah, that's all I have on that. And as always, if you want to know more about who we are, what we do, check us out at www.wa3%.org, and you can go to our website. You can read our bylaws. You can read what we're about, what our values are. All that stuff's on there. Also, from our website, you can join the link to our charity for veterans, which is Boots on the Home Ground, and that website will be also posted on the screen. Again, any help we can get with that, 100% of it goes to help veterans and communities in need in Washington State. With that, that's all I have for today, and I'll catch you next time on Behind the Wire. Good night.